The police suddenly came to my house and told me, "We are going to arrest your son for a $100,000 robbery." But the police came inside. When they saw my son, they were shocked. I replied, "My son is." The doorbell rang at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I was scrambling eggs for breakfast when the sound cut through the quiet of our suburban home. Through the peephole, I saw two police officers standing on my porch, their expressions grave and official. My heart dropped into my stomach. "Mrs. Catherine Brennan?" the taller officer asked when I opened the door. His badge read Officer Marcus Webb. "Yes, that's me," I managed, gripping the doorframe. "We have a warrant for the arrest of your son, Jason Brennan, in connection with a robbery that occurred at First Bank downtown. The stolen amount totals over $100,000. Officer Webb's partner, a woman named Officer Lisa Chen according to her nameplate, stood slightly behind him with her hand resting near her belt. I felt the blood drain from my face. A robbery? $100,000? This had to be some kind of mistake. My Jason wouldn't steal anything, let alone that kind of money. But even as my mind raced to deny it, I knew exactly who was behind this accusation. Derek Hastings. My ex-husband. Jason's father. "There must be some confusion," I said, my voice shaking. "Can you come inside? I need to show you something." Officer Webb exchanged a glance with Officer Chen, and they followed me into our modest living room. The morning light was just starting to filter through the curtains, casting long shadows across the worn furniture. We'd been living in this house for 3 years, ever since the divorce was finalized and Derek had made sure I walked away with as little as possible. "Is your son home?" Officer Chen asked, her tone slightly softer than her partner's. "He is. He's upstairs. But before you go up there, I need you to understand something about Jason." I took a deep breath, fighting back tears. My son is 7 years old. The silence that followed was deafening. Officer Webb's stern expression cracked, replaced by confusion. "I'm sorry, what?" "Jason is 7. He's in 2nd grade at Riverside Elementary. He just lost his first 2 front teeth last month." I walked to the mantel and grabbed a framed photo, handing it to them. It showed Jason grinning widely, displaying the gap where his teeth used to be, holding up a drawing he'd made of our cat, Whiskers. Officer Chen took the photo, studying it carefully. "Mrs. Brennan, the complaint we received stated that your son is 23 years old. The witness description matched an adult male." "Because that's what my ex-husband told you," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "Derek has been trying to destroy me for 3 years. This is just his latest attempt." Officer Webb pulled out his phone and began scrolling through what I assumed was the case file. The complaint was filed by a Derek Hastings, who identified himself as the victim's business partner. He claimed the suspect was Jason Brennan, provided this address, and gave a detailed description of the alleged perpetrator. "Let me guess," I said, my hands trembling. "The description matches someone in their 20s with dark hair, about 6 feet tall?" "Close enough," Officer Chen confirmed. 5'11", dark brown hair, approximately 180 pounds, with a tattoo of a compass on his right forearm. I almost laughed, but it came out as something closer to a sob. "My son weighs 52 pounds. Would you like to meet him?" I walked to the stairs and called up. "Jason, honey, can you come down here for a minute?" "Is it time for school already?" His small voice drifted down, still thick with sleep. "Not yet, sweetie. Just come down, please." Jason appeared at the top of the stairs in his dinosaur pajamas, clutching his stuffed triceratops named Rex. His hair stuck up in every direction, and he rubbed his eyes as he descended the stairs slowly, one step at a time. When he saw the police officers, he stopped halfway down, his eyes going wide. "Mom?" His voice was tiny, scared. "It's okay, baby. These officers just need to see you for a second. Come here." Jason hurried down the rest of the stairs and pressed himself against my side. I put my arm around his shoulders, feeling him shake slightly. Officer Chen knelt down to his eye level, her expression softening completely. "Hi there, Jason. I'm Officer Chen. You're not in any trouble, okay? We just needed to check something." Jason nodded mutely, burying his face against my shirt. Officer Webb was already on his phone, stepping away to make a call. I could hear him speaking in low, urgent tones. When he returned, his jaw was tight. "Mrs. Brennan, I think we need to have a longer conversation. Would you be willing to come down to the station later today to file a counter-report?" "Absolutely." I stroked Jason's hair, trying to calm both of us down. This isn't the first time Derek has pulled something like this. He's made false CPS reports, he's called my workplace claiming I'm embezzling, and he's even tried to have my car towed by reporting it stolen. His own car. Officer Chen stood up, shaking her head. "This is a serious abuse of emergency services and false reporting. The description he provided doesn't match a child in any way." "That's because Derek doesn't know what Jason looks like anymore." The words tasted bitter. He hasn't seen his son in over 2 years. He gave up custody voluntarily during the divorce, and then spent every moment since trying to make my life hell. After the officers left, promising to follow up, and suggesting I file a harassment complaint, I made Jason stay home from school. He was too shaken up, and honestly, so was I. We spent the morning on the couch, watching his favorite cartoons while I held him close and tried to figure out my next move. The story of how Derek and I fell apart would take days to tell properly, but the summary was this: we'd married young, when I was barely 21 and fresh out of college. Derek was 27, charming, successful, and everything I thought I wanted. His family owned Hastings Development Corporation, a mid-sized real estate company that had been steadily growing for 2 decades. For the first few years, things were good. Derek was attentive, generous, and we seemed to want the same things. Then I got pregnant with Jason. Derek's mask started slipping almost immediately. He became controlling, monitoring my every move, questioning every dollar I spent, and slowly isolating me from my friends and family. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs that I missed during those early years. The way Derek always needed to know where I was, who I was with, what I was doing. How he'd sulk if I spent time with my college roommate, Rachel, or my sister, Michelle. The subtle criticisms dressed up as concern: "Are you sure you want to wear that? It's a little tight, don't you think? Or maybe you should skip dessert, honey. You've been talking about losing those last 5 pounds." I excused it all as him caring about me, wanting the best for me. My mother had warned me that he seemed possessive, but I dismissed her concerns as old-fashioned thinking. I was a modern woman in love, and Derek was successful and driven. Of course he'd have strong opinions. The pregnancy changed everything. I'd been so excited to tell him, planning this elaborate reveal with a tiny pair of baby shoes and a positive test wrapped in a gift box. Derek's reaction wasn't what I'd imagined. He smiled, said all the right words, but his eyes held something else. Panic, maybe. Or resentment. Within weeks, he started commenting on my changing body in ways that felt cruel rather than supportive. He complained about my morning sickness disrupting his sleep, suggesting I move to the guest room so he wouldn't be disturbed. When I'd had a particularly rough day and asked him to pick up dinner on his way home, he'd snap that he wasn't my servant, and I needed to learn to manage better. The isolation intensified. Derek started finding reasons why we couldn't attend family gatherings. My parents lived 3 hours away, and suddenly every weekend trip became impossible because of his work schedule. When Michelle got engaged and asked me to be her maid of honor, Derek made such a fuss about the time commitment that I almost backed out, though Michelle convinced me to stand firm on that one. Friends from college slowly drifted away as I canceled plans repeatedly. Derek always had a reason why I couldn't go to girls' night or weekend brunches. He needed me home for a client dinner. He planned a surprise date night. He wasn't feeling well and needed me to take care of him. The excuses were endless and always positioned to make me feel guilty for wanting to spend time with anyone else. My job at Martinez Design Studio became my only sanctuary. I was good at my work, creating marketing materials and brand identities for local businesses. My boss, Gloria Martinez, was a fierce woman in her 50s who built her company from nothing. She saw through Derek's charm during the few times he'd visited the office, though she never said anything directly until much later. Pregnancy brought its own challenges at work. I was exhausted constantly during the first trimester, fighting waves of nausea while trying to meet client deadlines. Derek offered no support at home. He'd come in late, smelling of whiskey and making vague excuses about client meetings. I'd fallen asleep on the couch more than once, waiting for him, only to wake up alone with a blanket thrown over me and Derek already gone to work the next morning. The financial control started subtly. Derek suggested we consolidate our accounts to make managing money easier. Naive and trusting, I agreed. Within months, he questioned every purchase I made. A new pair of maternity jeans became an interrogation about why I couldn't just wear my regular clothes with a button undone. Groceries were scrutinized line by line. He set up alerts on our credit card so he'd know immediately if I spent money, and I'd get text messages asking what I'd bought before I'd even left the store. When Jason was born, I fell completely in love with this tiny, perfect human. Derek seemed detached from the moment they placed our son in his arms. He held Jason awkwardly, like he was handling a fragile package he might drop. The nurse had to show him how to support the baby's head properly. During our hospital stay, Derek spent more time on his phone than looking at his newborn son. Coming home was overwhelming. Jason cried constantly those first few weeks, and I was operating on maybe 2 hours of sleep per night. Derek moved permanently to the guest room, claiming he needed rest for work. My mother came to stay for a week, and Derek was so cold and unwelcoming that she pulled me aside before leaving. "Catherine, honey, I'm worried about you," she'd said, holding my hands in the nursery while Jason slept in his crib. "Derek isn't acting like a new father should. He barely looks at the baby, and he's treating you like hired help rather than his wife." I defended him, making excuses about the stress of his job and the adjustment period. Mom had just hugged me tight and made me promise to call if I needed anything. The concern in her eyes haunted me for weeks afterward. Michelle visited when Jason was 6 weeks old and Derek was on a business trip to Seattle. We'd stayed up late, me nursing Jason while she told me about her wedding plans. Then she'd ask the question I'd been avoiding, "Are you happy, Katie?" I'd burst into tears. The whole story came pouring out, all the little cruelties and big resentments I'd been bottling up. Michelle listened, her face growing darker with each revelation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You need to leave him," she finally said. "This isn't going to get better. Men like Derek don't change, they just get worse at hiding who they really are." But I wasn't ready to hear it yet. I had a 6-week-old baby, no independent income since I'd taken maternity leave, and Derek controlled all our finances. The thought of leaving seemed impossible, terrifying. So I stayed and told myself things would improve once Jason got older, once Derek adjusted to fatherhood, once work stress eased up. They didn't improve. They got worse. The real Derek emerged after Jason was born. He resented the attention I gave our son. He hated that I'd taken maternity leave for my job as a graphic designer, even though we'd agreed on it beforehand. He started staying out late, coming home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine, and making excuses that became increasingly transparent. Jason's first year was a blur of sleepless nights and lonely days. Derek's absences grew longer and more frequent. Business trips that used to last 2 days stretched to 5, then 7. When he was home, he treated our house like a hotel and me like the staff. He'd leave dirty clothes on the floor, expecting me to pick them up. He'd complain if dinner wasn't ready when he arrived, even though he never told me what time he'd be home. The affairs started around Jason's first birthday, though I didn't have proof until later. Derek became sloppy, probably intentionally. He wanted me to know he was stepping out. The perfume smell was just the beginning. Lipstick on a collar, hotel receipts in his jacket pocket, text messages that lit up his phone screen at 2 a.m. with hearts and kiss emojis. I confronted him after finding a credit card statement showing charges for expensive dinners at restaurants we'd never been to together, florists I'd never ordered from, and a jewelry store where I'd received nothing. Derek's response was to turn it around on me. "Maybe if you paid more attention to me instead of obsessing over the baby, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere," he'd said coldly. "You've let yourself go, Catherine. You're either covered in spit up or crying about how tired you are. What kind of wife is that?" The words cut deeper than I'd expected. I was exhausted, that was true. My body hadn't bounced back from pregnancy the way magazine covers suggested it should. I wore yoga pants and ponytails because they were practical for chasing after a toddler. But I was still me, still the woman he'd promised to love in sickness and health, for better or worse. That's when I started documenting everything. I opened a separate email account Derek didn't know about and started forwarding my self-evidence. Credit card statements, screenshots of text messages when he left his phone unattended, photos of lipstick stains and receipts. I didn't know what I'd do with it all, but some instinct told me I'd need proof eventually. Gloria noticed the change in me when I returned to work after maternity leave. I'd arranged for Jason to attend a daycare near the office, and I cherished those hours of adult conversation and creative work. But I was distracted, anxious, jumping every time my phone buzzed in case it was Derek with some new complaint or demand. "You want to grab coffee after work?" Gloria asked one afternoon, catching me staring blankly at my computer screen. My treat. We went to a quiet cafe 2 blocks from the office. Gloria ordered us both lattes and a slice of chocolate cake to share, and fixed me with the direct stare she usually reserved for difficult clients. "Talk to me, Catherine. What's going on? And don't say nothing, because I've seen nothing before and this isn't it." So I told her. Not everything, but enough. The isolation, the control, Derek's obvious infidelity, the way he treated me like I was barely human. Gloria listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious as I spoke. "I stayed in a marriage like that for 8 years, she finally said. My ex-husband, Richard, was cut from the same cloth as your Derek. Controlling, cheating, making me feel like everything was my fault. You know what I regret most? Not leaving sooner. I don't know how to leave," I admitted. "He controls all the money. I haven't had access to our bank accounts in months. He gives me an allowance for groceries and essentials, and if I go over, he makes me account for every penny." Gloria reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You start by opening your own bank account. You put your paychecks in there from now on. You talk to a lawyer, just a consultation to understand your rights. And you know I've got your back here at work. Whatever you need." That conversation was the first domino. Within a week, I'd opened a checking account at a different bank than the one Derek used. I started depositing my paychecks there, and surprisingly, Derek didn't notice right away. He was too busy with whatever else occupied his time. The lawyer consultation came next. Patricia Wynn's office was downtown in a high-rise building that made me feel small and out of place. But Patricia herself was warm and straightforward, explaining my options in plain language without legal jargon. "You have a strong case for custody," she said after reviewing the documents I'd brought. "You're the primary caregiver, you have stable employment, and you've documented his neglect and infidelity. Colorado is a no-fault divorce state, but the affairs and financial control will matter for custody and asset division." "How much is this going to cost?" I asked, dreading the answer. Patricia named a figure that made my stomach drop. Even with my new separate account, I didn't have anywhere near that kind of money. She must have seen the despair on my face because she added, "We can work out a payment plan. And I'll be honest with you, Catherine. Once we file, your husband's attorney is going to come at you hard. Men with money and ego don't like losing. But you have right on your side, and that counts for something." I left her office with a retainer agreement and a payment plan that would stretch my budget to breaking, but felt lighter than I had in months. I had a plan now. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was preparing to escape. By the time Jason turned 3, I had enough. I filed for divorce, and Derek's true colors exploded in Technicolor. He hired the most vicious attorney in the city, someone who made their reputation by grinding opposing parties into dust. They froze our joint accounts, claimed I was an unfit mother, and tried to paint me as a gold digger who'd trapped Derek with a pregnancy. Derek's lawyer was a shark named Bradley Thornton, who specialized in high-net-worth divorces and had a reputation for destroying opposing parties. Our first court appearance, he'd shown up with a briefcase full of evidence of my supposed unfitness as a mother. Grainy photos of me at a park with Jason, which he claimed showed me neglecting my child because I was looking at my phone. Statements from Derek's colleagues saying I'd seemed unstable at company events, though I'd barely attended any because Derek never invited me. The accusations were absurd but terrifying. Thornton presented receipts from my grocery shopping, highlighting purchases of wine and claiming I had a drinking problem. The truth was I bought a bottle of wine maybe twice a month and usually only had a single glass with dinner. He questioned why Jason had missed 3 days of preschool in a 6-month period, suggesting I was irresponsible, conveniently ignoring that those were sick days when Jason had the flu. Patricia fought back hard, but we were outmatched financially. Every motion Thornton filed cost money to respond to. Every deposition, every hearing, every piece of paperwork drained my already limited resources. I'd maxed out my credit card paying legal fees. Gloria had given me a raise and let me take on extra freelance projects through the studio, but it still wasn't enough. The lowest point came during a particularly brutal deposition. Thornton questioned me for 6 hours straight, going through every aspect of my life with cruel precision. How many times had I yelled at Jason? What did I feed him for breakfast each day? Why had I chosen this daycare over another one? Did I spank him? Did I drink during pregnancy? Had I ever had postpartum depression? That last question hit hard because the answer was yes. After Jason was born, I'd struggled with postpartum depression for about 4 months. My doctor had prescribed medication, I'd gone to therapy, and I'd recovered. But Thornton twisted it into evidence that I was mentally unstable, unfit to care for a child. He submitted my medical records, which Patricia fought but couldn't fully suppress. Derek watched the whole deposition with this small, satisfied smile. That's when I realized the truth, he didn't actually want custody of Jason. He never had. This whole battle was about punishing me for leaving him, for having the audacity to choose myself and our son over his abuse. Jason was just a weapon to him, a way to hurt me. Michelle attended the deposition with me for moral support. Afterward, in Patricia's office, I broke down completely. The stress, the fear, the financial pressure, all of it came crashing down. I sobbed so hard I couldn't breathe, and Michelle held me while Patricia calmly handed over tissues and waited for the storm to pass. "Listen to me, Catherine," Patricia said once I'd calmed down enough to hear her. "I know this feels impossible right now. But Thornton is overplaying his hand. The judge isn't stupid. She's going to see through these tactics. We just need to hold on a little longer." "I don't have any more money," I whispered. "I've borrowed from my parents, from Michelle. I've sold everything I can sell. I don't know how to keep fighting." "Then we fight smarter instead of harder," Patricia said. "I'm going to file a motion to compel Derek to pay your legal fees. In Colorado, if there's a significant income disparity between spouses, the court can order the higher earner to cover costs. It's a long shot, but worth trying." The motion was filed, and miraculously, the judge agreed to a partial award. Derek had to pay $15,000 toward my legal fees. It wasn't everything, but it gave me breathing room. More importantly, it signaled that the judge was paying attention to the power imbalance. As the custody evaluation approached, Derek made his first major mistake. The court-appointed evaluator, Dr. Sarah Chen, was known for being thorough and unbiased. She spent time with both of us separately, then with Jason, and finally did home visits to each of our residences. Derek's home visit was a disaster. He'd moved into a luxury condo downtown, all glass and steel and expensive furniture. It looked like a showroom, not a place where a child lived. There was no toys, no childproofing, Nothing that suggested Jason had ever visited, let alone lived there. When Dr. Chen asked Derek about his daily routine with Jason, he couldn't answer basic questions. What time did Jason go to bed? What were his favorite foods? Who was his pediatrician? What was the name of his best friend at preschool? Derek didn't know the answers because he'd never been involved enough to learn them. Dr. Chen's report was damning. She noted that Derek showed superficial knowledge of the child's daily life and needs and that his home was unsuitable for regular child visitation without significant modifications. She recommended that I retain primary custody with Derek receiving supervised visitation until he could demonstrate genuine engagement with his son. Reading that report in Patricia's office, I felt a weight lift that I'd been carrying for months. We had a real chance now. Thornton tried to discredit Dr. Chen, claiming bias, but the judge shut him down quickly. Dr. Chen had been evaluating families for 20 years and had an impeccable reputation. The custody battle was brutal. Derek's lawyer tried every angle, but in the end, the facts spoke for themselves. I had been Jason's primary caregiver since birth. I had documentation of Derek's affairs, his emotional abuse, and his complete lack of interest in parenting. His own parents testified that they rarely saw him interact with Jason beyond the occasional photo opportunity. The final custody hearing was in early October, when Jason had just turned 4. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with harsh fluorescent lighting that made everything feel stark and cold. Derek sat at his table with Thornton and a junior associate, looking confident and composed in an expensive suit. I sat next to Patricia, wearing my best dress, hands trembling in my lap. The judge, Honorable Margaret Fielding, was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She'd reviewed all the documents, the custody evaluation, the financial records, and the witness statements. Now she wanted to hear directly from both parties. Derek went first. He'd clearly been coached by Thornton, speaking in measured tones about how much he loved his son and wanted to be an active part of his life. He claimed his work schedule had kept him from being as present as he'd wanted, but that he was ready to make changes, to prioritize fatherhood. He talked about providing stability and opportunities, about the advantages his financial resources could offer Jason. It was a good performance, I had to admit. If I didn't know him, didn't know the truth behind the polished exterior, I might have believed him. But I'd lived with Derek long enough to recognize when he was lying. The slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed against the table, the emptiness behind his eyes when he said he loved Jason. Then it was my turn. Patricia had prepared me, but standing there in front of Judge Fielding felt surreal. I talked about Jason's daily routine, about how I knew he hated carrots but loved broccoli if it was roasted with a little cheese. How he needed his stuffed triceratops, Rex, to fall asleep. How he had nightmares sometimes about monsters under his bed, and I'd sit with him until he felt safe again. How he was learning to write his name and was so proud when he got all the letters in the right order. I talked about being there for every milestone, first steps, first words, first day of preschool. About staying up all night when he had croup, holding him in the steamy bathroom while he struggled to breathe because Derek had been too busy to help. About birthday parties and play dates and teaching him to ride his tricycle in the park. My voice broke when I described what it felt like to worry constantly that I wasn't enough, that Derek's money and lawyers would convince the court to take my son away from the only stable parent he'd ever known. Patricia touched my arm gently, and I steadied myself. Your Honor, I'm not perfect, I said finally. I get tired and frustrated. Sometimes I let Jason watch too much TV because I need 20 minutes to breathe. Sometimes we have chicken nuggets for dinner because I'm too exhausted to cook. But I love my son with everything I have, and I've never stopped showing up for him. I can't say the same for his father. Judge Fielding asked Derek when he'd last spent a full day alone with Jason. Derek hesitated, clearly calculating, before admitting it had been over 8 months. She asked him Jason's pediatrician's name. He didn't know. She asked what allergies Jason had. Derek guessed peanuts, but it was actually strawberries, a mild allergy we discovered when he was 2. The judge's expression never changed, but I saw something shift in her eyes. She called for a brief recess, and when we returned, her decision was swift and unambiguous. The judge granted me full custody. Derek didn't even fight it in the end. He just signed the papers, gave up his parental rights without a single tear, and walked away. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Derek couldn't let go of the humiliation. He'd lost in court, something his ego couldn't accept. So he launched a different kind of campaign. Every few months, something new would happen. The CPS reports claiming I was neglecting Jason. The calls to my employer at Martinez Design Studio, suggesting I was stealing client information. The time he convinced his friend at a towing company to impound my car by claiming it was his and I'd stolen it. Each incident was designed to cause maximum disruption with minimal actual evidence. Derek was smart enough to stay just on the edge of legal consequences. He never did anything quite serious enough to warrant a restraining order, but he did enough to keep me constantly stressed, constantly looking over my shoulder. This robbery accusation was different, though. This crossed a line even for Derek. Later that afternoon, I drove to the police station with a folder full of documentation. Inside were copies of the divorce decree, the custody agreement, Derek's voluntary termination of parental rights, and a detailed timeline of every harassment incident over the past 3 years. I'd been keeping records, hoping I'd eventually have enough for a restraining order. Now I had something better. Detective Raymond Torres met with me in a small interview room. He was in his 40s, with graying hair and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's worst side. He listened as I laid out the entire history, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. "This bank robbery allegation," Detective Torres said, tapping his pen against his notepad. "Your ex-husband filed a report claiming to be the victim's business partner. He stated that you and your adult son conspired to rob First Bank of $100,000 from a business account." "I've never had any business dealings with Derek since the divorce," I said firmly. "And my son is 7 years old and has never been inside First Bank in his life. His savings account is at Credit Union of America, with exactly $247 in it from birthday gifts." Detective Torres nodded slowly. "We're pulling the surveillance footage from First Bank now." There was indeed a robbery matching the timeframe Mr. Hastings reported. But based on the footage we've reviewed so far, the suspect is a white male in his mid-20s, approximately 5'10", with a full beard and a baseball cap. The interesting thing is, the victim whose account was robbed? It's a shell company owned by Hastings Development Corporation. I felt my eyebrows shoot up. He robbed himself? That's what it's starting to look like. Or someone close to him did. The way these things usually work, someone files a false police report about stolen money, collects insurance money, and tries to pin it on someone else to avoid suspicion. But by naming you and your obviously underage child, he may have tipped his hand. "So what happens now?" I asked, hope beginning to stir in my chest. "Now we investigate Derek Hastings for filing a false police report, insurance fraud, and possibly embezzlement from his own company. And based on your documentation here, we're also looking at criminal harassment charges. Mrs. Brennan, you might want to consider getting an attorney." I already had one in mind. Patricia Wynn had handled my divorce, and while I couldn't afford her aggressive representation during the custody battle, she'd done what she could with the limited budget I had. This time, I'd figure out how to pay her somehow. This was worth going into debt for. 3 days later, Patricia and I sat in her office downtown, overlooking the city skyline. She'd reviewed all my documentation and had spoken with Detective Torres personally. Her expression was one I'd never seen before, pure, predatory satisfaction. "Catherine, I'm going to be blunt with you," Patricia said, leaning back in her leather chair. "Derek screwed up massively this time. The police have confirmed that the robbery was staged. Security footage shows a man matching the description of Derek's business partner, Nathan Cross, withdrawing the money from the business account, then filing a report claiming it was stolen. Derek was the one who reported it to police and named you as the suspect. Why would he do something so stupid?" I asked. "Even for Derek, this seems extreme." "Because Hastings Development is in financial trouble," Patricia said, sliding a printed document across her desk. I did some digging. The company has been hemorrhaging money for the past 18 months. Bad investments, failed developments, and some extremely questionable business decisions. Derek needed cash fast, probably to avoid bankruptcy. So he and Nathan cooked up this insurance fraud scheme, and Derek decided to kill 2 birds with 1 stone by framing you. I picked up the document, scanning the financial records. "How did you get these?" "Let's just say I have a friend who's very good at finding public records and leave it at that." Patricia smiled. "Here's what's going to happen. The district attorney is filing criminal charges against Derek for false reporting and insurance fraud. Nathan has already flipped and is cooperating with the investigation in exchange for a lighter sentence. And here's the beautiful part, because Derek named a minor child in his false police report, that's considered especially egregious. It's going to carry serious weight." "What does this mean for me?" I asked, almost afraid to hope. "It means we're going to sue him civilly for harassment, emotional distress, defamation, and anything else I can think of. It means we're getting you a restraining order, and this time it's going to stick. And it means Derek Hastings is going to spend the next several years wishing he'd just left you alone after the divorce." The next few months moved with the slow inevitability of a glacier. Derek was arrested and charged with multiple felonies. The local news picked up the story, and watching his mugshot flash across the evening broadcast was surreal. The man who'd once seemed so powerful and untouchable now looked small and scared. Nathan Cross's testimony was damning. He detailed how Derek had approached him with a plan, how they'd staged the robbery, and how Derek had specifically mentioned using it as a way to finally get back at that bitch ex-wife. His words, according to the police report. The restraining order was granted without objection. Derek's attorney advised him not to fight it, given the criminal charges pending. My civil suit moved forward, and Patricia was relentless. She deposed Derek's family, his business associates, and even tracked down his current girlfriend, who had some interesting stories about Derek's obsession with teaching me a lesson. Jason slowly recovered from the trauma of seeing police at our door. His school counselor worked with him, and gradually his nightmares faded. I explained everything in age-appropriate terms. Daddy had told a lie to the police, and now he was in trouble because lying is wrong. Jason seemed to accept this with the simple clarity that children have about right and wrong. The trial for Derek's criminal charges was scheduled for February. In December, his attorney approached Patricia about a plea deal. Derek was drowning in legal fees, his company was collapsing, and his family had cut him off financially. He wanted to avoid trial. Patricia and I met in her office again to discuss the prosecution's offer. Derek would plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. He would also agree to a settlement in my civil case, paying me $300,000 in damages. The money would come from the forced sale of his personal assets, including his luxury condo and his sports car collection. The prosecutor wants to know if you'll agree to this, Patricia said. If you push for trial, there's always a risk, even though the evidence is solid. But this plea deal guarantees he serves time and you get compensation. I thought about it for a long moment. What's the sentence? 3 years, with eligibility for parole after 18 months if he demonstrates good behavior. And the money is guaranteed? The assets are already in escrow pending the outcome. The moment he signs the plea agreement, the sale proceeds to pay you first, before any other creditors. I looked out Patricia's window at the city below. Somewhere out there, Derek was probably in his own attorney's office, facing the destruction of everything he'd built. Part of me wanted to see him suffer more, to push for trial and watch him squirm on the stand. But another part of me, the part that was tired and just wanted peace for Jason and myself, saw the wisdom in ending this now. I'll take the deal, I said. On one condition. What's that? I want a written confession as part of the plea agreement. I want him to admit on record that he filed a false police report naming his 7-year-old son in a fabricated crime. I want those words in legal documents forever. Patricia's smile was fierce. I'll make it happen. 3 weeks later, I stood in the courtroom gallery as Derek entered his guilty plea. He looked terrible, having lost at least 20 pounds, his expensive suit hanging off his frame. He wouldn't look at me, keeping his eyes fixed on the judge as he answered questions in a monotone. The judge accepted the plea and asked if there was anything Derek wanted to say. His attorney whispered something to him, and Derek cleared his throat. I want to apologize to my ex-wife, Catherine, and to my son, Jason, he said, his voice barely audible. I let my anger and pride control me. I made horrible choices and hurt innocent people, including my own child. I take full responsibility for my actions. It was probably scripted by his attorney, but I didn't care. Hearing him say those words in open court, having them entered into the permanent record, was enough. The settlement money arrived in my account in March. $300,000 felt like an impossible amount after 3 years of struggling to make ends meet. I paid off my car, my credit cards, and the small mountain of debt Derek's harassment had caused me. I put a substantial amount into a college fund for Jason. The rest went into savings and some careful investments Patricia recommended. With financial breathing room for the first time in years, I could finally focus on rebuilding our lives instead of just surviving. Jason and I moved to a better neighborhood with excellent schools. I was able to return to freelance graphic design, something I'd always loved but hadn't had the mental space for while constantly dealing with Derek's attacks. Derek served 17 months before being paroled. By then, Jason was 8 years old and had only the vaguest memories of his father. When Jason asked me once if Derek would ever come back into our lives, I showed him the restraining order and explained it simply. His father had to stay away from us by law, and that was to keep us safe. I don't really remember him anyway, Jason said, shrugging with the easy acceptance of childhood. You're enough, Mom. Those words meant more to me than any settlement check ever could. The final piece of poetic justice came from an unexpected source. Derek's parents, Richard and Margaret Hastings, reached out through Patricia, asking if they could meet with me. I was hesitant at first, remembering how they testified against Derek during the custody battle but had never reached out afterward. We met at a quiet coffee shop downtown. Richard and Margaret looked older than I remembered, the stress of the past year evident in the new lines on their faces. Margaret had tears in her eyes before she even sat down. Catherine, we owe you an apology, Richard said heavily. We knew Derek had problems, but we enabled him for too long. We thought he'd grow out of his selfishness, that he'd eventually mature. Instead, he became something we're ashamed of. We want to know our grandson, Margaret added, her voice breaking. We know we have no right to ask, and if you say no, we'll respect that. But Jason is our only grandchild, and we've missed so much of his life because of Derek's actions. I studied them both carefully. During the divorce, they'd been fair in their testimony, admitting Derek's shortcomings even though it hurt their case. They'd never joined Derek's harassment campaign, and according to Patricia's investigation, they'd cut him off financially when they learned about the insurance fraud. I need to think about it, I said honestly. And I need to talk to Jason. He's old enough to have opinions about who's in his life. But I'm willing to consider it, under the right circumstances. Over the following months, we took it slowly. Richard and Margaret met Jason at a family counseling session, where a therapist helped facilitate the conversation. Jason was curious but cautious, asking direct questions about why they hadn't been around before. To their credit, Richard and Margaret didn't make excuses. They told Jason, in age-appropriate terms, that his father had made bad choices and they hadn't known how to help. They admitted they'd stayed away because they were ashamed and didn't know if they'd be welcome. They asked for a chance to be grandparents, if Jason was open to it. Jason thought about it seriously, his small face scrunched in concentration. Finally, he said, "Can we play chess? Grandpa?" Richard's eyes filled with tears. "I'd love that, buddy. I'd love that." 2 years after the police showed up at my door with a warrant for my 7-year-old son's arrest, life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. Jason was thriving in school, had good friends, and spent every other Saturday with his grandparents, who doted on him shamelessly. My design business was flourishing, and I'd even started dating again, though nothing serious yet. Derek remained out of our lives, as required by law. I heard through Patricia that he'd moved to another state after his parole ended, trying to start over with a different name and a different career. I didn't waste energy wondering about him anymore. He'd gambled that he could hurt me one last time and had lost spectacularly. Sometimes Jason asked questions about that morning the police came. I answered honestly but simply, his father had made a mistake and tried to blame us for something we didn't do, but the truth came out, and justice was served. Jason seemed satisfied with that explanation.